Welcome. Tonight in the economic talk show, we are going to have a little conversation about GDP with Professor Liu and Professor Zheng from University of Somewhere. Hi, Professor Zheng and Professor Liu. It's my honor to have both of you in the studio. We have heard people and media talk about GDP all the time. What GDP really is? Can you briefly describe it for us and why it's so commonly used around the world?
Thank you, Lola, for having me and Professor Liu. GDP is short for Gross Domestic Product, the monetary value of all the finished goods and service produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. That is, a country with high GDP is considered to have a high economic level. GDP has been long used as a standard indicator since the establishment of IMF. So today, a number of economists study GDP to analyze the health of national and international economies. Politicians and decision makers also use GDP to justify the government's fiscal policies.
Wow, then how do we calculate a country's GDP?
Well, there are three approaches to calculate GDP. The most common approach is expenditure method. It adds up all the expenditure incurred in the market, including household consumption, investment, government spending, and net export. The S&A system of national account collects the figures, and every business quarter it releases the GDP figures it calculates. So the second approach is income method. That is the sum of payments to factors across households, and payments to factors include payments to labor or total wages and salaries, plus non-factor income or accounting profit, plus earnings on loans, bonds, stocks, or capital, plus profits occurring to funds owners. The third approach is production or value-added method.
And please pay attention to the expenditure method. Only the expenditure on final goods is counted when we calculate the GDP, because it will double counting if we both counted final goods and intermediate goods.
Wow, that's a lot of information. Well, let's do a quick review about what Professors Zheng and Professor Liu just said. Okay.
GDP is short for Gross Domestic Product, the monetary value of all the finished goods and services produced within a country's border in a specific time period. There are three methods to calculate GDP. First, expenditure method. Second, income method. Third, production or value-added method. Expenditure method. When we look at GDP, it can be broken down to four components. The variable on the PowerPoint shows you these components. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus NX. C stands for consumption. It's all the spending done by household consumers. I is investment, which represents all the spending done by firms in economy. G represents government spending. And finally, NX. NX stands for net export. It is export minus import. From equation, we can see that nation's income equals to nation's expenditure. Income method. Sum of payments to factors across households, including payments to labor or wages and salaries. Non-factor income or accounting profit plus earnings on firms' loans, bonds, stocks, or capital plus profits accruing to firms' owners. Production or value-added method. Revenue in sector J less expendable input costs, which is another way of adding payments to factors. Let's do a little quiz. We have a wheat farm provides wheat for flour mill, and flour mill provides flour for bakery for making bakery products. Bakery products products are the final goods. The question is, what is the GDP by using three methods? From the answer, we can see that by using expenditure method, only the bread is consumed by household, so the GDP equals to consumption equals to 360. In income method, we adding up payments to primary factor gives us 360, and production method take the sum of value added across all industries. We also got 360. Hope you got it right.
I hope you get the answer. I heard a lot about nominal GDP and real GDP, what they really are.
Well, when we calculate the GDP, there are actually two different figures, the nominal GDP and real GDP. Well, the nominal GDP is that is with any given year, we take the price of that year and multiply by the quantity of item in that year and do the same for the second item and so on and so forth. Then we add them up to get the nominal GDP. Well, we only take the current price and quantity when we do that. When looking at the changes in the nominal GDP, what we are seeing is that both the changes in the absolute quantity of the things being bought and sold, but also the changes in the price. Well, real GDP is hold a constant price from one year to another in order to control the changes in the price. We take the price in base year and use the quantity in current years. So all the changes going in this is due to the changing in the quantity. Therefore, in base year, the nominal GDP is equal to the real GDP. And sometimes the economics focus on what happened to the aggregate level of price from one year to another. Since the GDP deflator is a measurement to aggregate nominal price level in the economy. It's equal to the nominal GDP of a given year and divided by the real GDP in a given year times 100. So it also can be used as a method to calculate the inflations, which is the changes in the aggregate price level from one year to another.
Wow, that's a lot of information again, so we have to do a review again. So let's do a review.
Nominal GDP measures these values using current prices. We take the quantity of item in that year and multiply by the price of item in that year, and do the same for the second item, and so on and so forth. And the real GDP measures these values using the price of a base year. We take the quantity of item in that year and multiply by the price of item in the base year, and do the same for the second item, and so on. GDP deflator is the ratio of the nominal and the real GDP estimates for a same year. Let's do a pop-up quiz again. Here is our question. Suppose first year is the base year, so we got each year's nominal GDP by that year's quantity times that year's price. And we got real GDP by multiplying current year's quantity with base year's price. And the GDP deflator is the ratio of that year's nominal and the real GDP.
Hopefully you got it. So how economists and politicians make use of these figures in practice? Can you give us an example?
Yeah. For example, if GDP growth rate is too high, it indicates a possibility of inflation, and the government may raise the interest rate to prevent the inflation. In addition, a significant change in GDP usually has a significant effect on the stock market. It's not hard to understand why. A bad economy is like lower profits for companies, which in turn means the lower stock prices. Investors really worried about negative GDP growth, which is one of the factors economists use to determine whether an economy is in a recession.
Yes, but the figure is not always the correct direction for us to use, because the GDP itself also has a limit.
Wow, what limits it has?
It's one-sided. It does not cover the measure of well-being, say it doesn't consider the issues of education and employment and environment.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. For example, the 2013 bushfire in New South Wales resulted in a great loss to Australia. Total cost incurred in the bushfire was up to 94 million Australian dollars.
Wow.
While the expenditure of the bushfire caused GDP to increase, the reality is that the depletion of capital results in damage to the domestic economy in the following years. This case points out the limit of GDP is it only considers the welfare from the perspective of finance. It doesn't distinguish between costs and benefits, between productive and destructive activities, or between sustainable and unsustainable development.
Well, does it mean GDP is no longer a useful reference for us to use?
No, not exactly. It's still a good indicator for us to measure the economy, but it's just not accurate. Because the GDP assumes that the social well-being only means the economic growth, but we can say that it's not the case. Just like Professor Zheng said that high monetary value production does not automatically allocate to societal well-being development.
Wow, so how can we respond to this limit?
Well, many economics are looking for beyond the GDP and recommended an alternative to the GDP. Well, some scholars point out that the HDI is one of appropriate indicators.
Well, can you briefly introduce HDI and its relationship with GDP?
Yeah, of course. HDI stands for the Human Development Index. The HDI was created to emphasize that people and their capability should be ultimate criteria for assessing the development of a country, not economic growth alone. It measures society well-being from the three dimensions of human development. First is health. Second, then is education. Finally, is standard of living. HDI explains well-being as a development of society and the quality of life, where the GDP assumes that well-being only means economic growth. It's maybe the case that as government and the media focus on the GDP only, it stimulates them to take action to raise the figure as high as possible. And the action they are taken may be damage the environment and the standard of living of the citizens.
Yeah, you are right. I've heard about the case that some developing countries might be encouraged to allow foreign mining companies to mine in their country, even though the country received low royalty, even though the environment might be degraded, and even though the miners might have health issues. But by doing so, the GDP will be increased.
That's the case. The GDP is reflective of economic growth of a country, but HDI is an indicator of development. However, people of any country of growth cannot be restricted to a minority. To this effect, it must be remembered that development and economic growth are not mutually exclusive. As the development cannot take place without economic growth. Growth should be therefore seen as an economic end in itself, but as a means to achieve ends of higher human and social development.
Wow, you are right. Thank you, Professor Zheng and Professor Liu, for coming.
It's
My pleasure.
As we discussed tonight, GDP is a figure to measure a country's economic performance, and it has a limitation. Hopefully, in the near future, the economists will find a way to fix the limitation and make GDP as a better indicator that includes both economic performance and human development. Thank you for watching and have a good night.